Hi everyone, this is Michael Mendez. You can call me Mikey. I'm here to talk about video games. Video games have been around for over 70 years now, and there have been so many great and terrible things that have come out of the industry since its inception in 1958. There have been changes to how games are made over the years, and debates on whether video games are for the fans or for the people making money off of them. The short answer is that they're really being made for both nowadays, but I'm not here for the short answer. I'm here for part of a longer, much more convoluted answer. I'm talking about how publishers of video games can affect the developers and the games they put out. I chose this topic because I've always wondered why video games were coming out so much more quickly back in the early 2000s compared to now. Now, the standard wait time for a highly anticipated AAA game is 3 to 5 years after being announced. It used to be a year to a year and a half. Once I started doing some digging, I found that a lot of it had to do with publishers and developers not reaching a proper agreement for how a particular game should be when it's released. Then I started looking deeper and found that publishers and developers have been warring with each other behind the scenes for decades. So let me start with what a publisher actually does. A publisher is supposed to handle the marketing, distribution, and some of the production for video games. Essentially, they help developers with the resources they need to create and put out video games. Now, there are companies that exclusively do the publishing, and there are also companies that develop and publish video games in-house. Most publishers outsource other video game developers to make games for them, or they acquire other developers through exclusive ownership agreements. The main publishers that do this are, but not limited to, Electronic Arts, 2K, Sony, Bethesda, Microsoft, Epic Games, Tencent, Embracer Group, Activision, Take-Two Interactive, Bandai Namco, Konami, and many more. It used to be that video game developers would decide what game they want to make, they make it, and in the process, they ask publishers to help them market their games. Down the road, publishers figured out that they can make a lot of money from this, so they eventually started pitching games to these developers and getting them to sign contracts to get games done within a certain time frame. That's when the problems began for developers. Over the years, industry practices have evolved into developer acquisitions, where publishing studios will buy out the developers to exclusively make games for that publisher. Companies have also instilled microtransactions to make money off of games post-launch. Microtransactions are essentially in-game currency that people can buy to get things to either help progress in a game or to acquire cosmetics in a game. There's an industry practice that stems from a production culture where publishers would impose impossible deadlines on the developers, and it causes them to work 60 hours or more a week. This production culture was called crunch time, and it has become an industry practice over the last decade and a half. There's a plethora of effects that all of this has on developers. These can be mass firings, video game delays, sketchy game launches. Crunch time and public outcry are all of the things that have come out of the industry in the last decade. This has even made it into the SAG-AFTRA strike in regards to actors not being paid enough and the introduction of AI threatening their jobs. A headline on PBS NewsHour states Hollywood actors vote to strike against video game makers in ongoing labor dispute. Further into the article, it says some of the same issues are at play in the video game negotiations as in the broader actor strike that has shut down Hollywood for months, including wages, safety measures, and protections on the use of artificial intelligence. The companies involved include gaming giants Activision, Electronic Arts, Epic Games, Take-Two Productions, as well as Disney and Warner Brothers video game divisions. In 2020, a highly respected video game publisher developer, CD Projekt Red, had released a game called Cyberpunk 2077. The developers knew that the game wasn't ready yet, and the publishers wanted that sweet cash, so they told them to put it out anyways. Well, that decision turned gaming on its head because it led to the most controversial launch in video game history. The game launched in an unfinished, and in many cases, an unplayable state. It was so bad that it had corrupted many players' consoles, to the point where the game had either crashed every time someone tried to play it, or erased all of their data on their console. In some cases, there were reports that the game had permanently shut down their console. And an article from the New York Times states, nearly a decade of hype led to a troubled release filled with glitches, a livid fan base, refunds for potentially millions of players, and a possible class action lawsuit. Soon after that article was published, the game was removed from online store shelves until the issue was fixed. Another factor that plays into the ongoing struggle between publishers and developers is the change in technology. Before 2010, graphics weren't that realistic. I mean, you knew that you were playing a video game back then. However, the graphics in video games have significantly improved in the last 2 decades. Games like Detroit Become Human use a photorealistic game engine that has a lot of demand on the gaming console that it's being played on. The higher demand on the console, the more processing it must do, which means the developers are making games that take up a lot of storage. Most AAA games nowadays are at least 50 gigabytes. Back then, you used to be able to just put in the disc and play the game, but all discs nowadays come with extra software that you must download in order to even play the game. With that in mind, many developers have had to cut corners to compress the file size on a video game. Or they just tell consumers to just accept the fact that they have a huge file size, because if not, then the quality of the game will be diminished. In an article on Supply Chain Game Changer, it even says, in fact, graphics are so real-like today that it's hard to tell between online gaming and live gaming. For instance, FIFA, the online football game, has extremely lifelike players. The graphics are so advanced that the virtual game looks like a live football match. Now, we all know that the primary reason why publishers are so hard on developers is the fact that they want to make money. There have always been different ways for game companies to make money, from selling exclusive content through limited collector's edition runs to downloadable content post-launch. Not too long after downloadable content was introduced to the 7th generation of gaming consoles, microtransactions have been making several companies a lot of money. This specifically goes to companies that exclusively make their money on their sports games like 2K and EA. In an article on GameByte talking about microtransactions, it says what is surprising is just how much money microtransactions are making for video game publishers. In the first quarter of 2018, EA made over $787 million from what they call live services. This relates to revenue made from extra content from online games. For EA, this means microtransactions for games like FIFA, Mass Effect, and Madden. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. This has been Michael Mendez, aka Mikey, signing off.